This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
We are talking about the future of food on this episode of Real Talk, and in just a second, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who has introduced me to somebody else, and the three of us are going to hang out and talk about where food is going, where you're going to be getting your food 10, 15, or maybe 2 years from now, how it's going to be grown, whether or not animals will even be involved. Where's big investment going in agribusiness, in the food trade? I guarantee you're going to learn something in this edition of the Real Talk Roundtable. Plus, we have a fired up edition of the Flamethrower. It's exclusively dedicated to our conversation this week with the two lawyers that are leading the class action against the provincial and federal governments claiming vaccine injuries from that COVID vaccine. Real Talkers are all fired up, and we'll hand the mic over to you, courtesy of the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. That's coming up on the back nine of this show. But this episode is presented by our friends at Business Career College, and they're specifically looking for financial advisors and senior finance professionals who are looking to learn more about digital assets and decentralized finance. The numbers tell us that the new generation of investors, 75% of them are interested in adding digital assets to their financial portfolios. And so advisors are going to see more questions about things like the blockchain and Bitcoin and NFTs and decentralized finance. If you want to advise your clients effectively, you need to go beyond what you're seeing on Instagram Reels and actually get into that CDAA. That's the Certified Digital Asset Advisor, a new designation program offered only by Business Career College. You know, they've been a leader in financial training since 1997. And if you sign up today using the promo code RYAN20, that's all one word, RYAN20, they're going to knock 20% off the registration for the CDAA designation at businesscareercollege.com. Well, it was probably, coming up on a year ago that I first met Isha Datar, and when she told me what she was doing in cellular agriculture, on the spot, I said to her, you have to promise me that you'll join us on Real Talk to get into this, and she did. Not only that, she's brought a friend of hers, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Sean Yam in just a second. Isha's been the executive director for more than a decade of New Harvest. New Harvest is a really, really fascinating nonprofit anchored in the United States, Canada, and the Netherlands, and they're growing food from cells. Isha was one of the first, as a matter of fact, to publish a paper on growing meat in a lab, and she's the one that coined the term cellular agriculture. I guarantee you've heard it. Do we know what it actually means? I barely do, but we're going to find out today. Isha, it is so good to have you here in the Real Talk studio. Thank you for making time for us.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. It's so exciting to be here.
Yeah, you and I have been emailing, and you said, well, if we're going to talk about the future of food, we have to have Sean Yam in the mix.
That's right.
Because of what he's doing. And Sean, we're grateful that we caught you, an Edmonton born and raised product. However, plying your trade now for almost 15 years in Italy. You're centered out of Milan, but I'll get you right up to the mic here. We've got you now at home in Edmonton. Tell us what you do as the CEO of Gregory. What's Gregory all about?
So I'm COO, actually. I'm not CEO.
Pardon me.
So
I just promoted you.
You did. I think our CEO is actually listening, and he's either laughing or his hair's on fire right now.
Okay.
But we work very closely together, him and I, so Christian and I. So
okay, what do you guys do there?
So basically, we're a structured investment firm. We invest, we advise, and we trade. And we invest in what we call the dairy ecosystem, which is a bit broader than what Isha does, but there's lots of nice overlap and nice synergy there. We have invested in some cellular companies, those working in the future of dairy, for instance. So producing dairy proteins like casein and whey through fermentation processes by, you're the scientist, so I'll let you explain in a bit. But essentially producing bioequivalent one-to-one milk proteins in labs.
Okay.
Which is a game changer.
So without cows.
Without cows.
Without cows.
Okay, help us under this is going to blow our minds, Isha. But to talk to us about, like, so people have heard the phrase cellular agriculture.
I hope
We're now talking to the person who coined it. Generally speaking, hit us at like a junior high school level here.
Sure.
What's cellular agriculture?
Cellular agriculture is very simply growing agricultural stuff from cells instead of from plants or animals. So an example of this is like those milk proteins we talked about. So milk is mostly water and about 3% proteins. And so those proteins can be made by genetically engineering an organism, a much simpler organism than a cow, such as a yeast or a microbe, to produce that protein for you instead of a cow. So no cow is required. You actually just log into a database, look for that cow protein gene, print it, insert it into a microorganism and have it churn out that protein for you. And it looks like a brewery situation.
Yeah.
Incredible.
The milk looks like milk, tastes like milk, behaves like milk when people are going to use it in recipes.
I mean, it depends who's asking, but the proteins are the same, bioidentical proteins, but then you have to formulate it and get it, to work with the rest of the ingredients in the formulation, because milk is not just the proteins.
Right.
Yeah. But pretty much, yes.
Can I jump in here for a second?
Yes.
You can jump in all morning long.
Excellent. Well, we have all morning, I guess. It's great. And more coffee, too. But so Isha's the science expert. And, I mean, I've never actually, I've milked a cow in elementary school, but I'm not, out on the farm every single day. And, when I first started in this industry, I said to myself, honestly, what the hell? Can I say hell?
You can say whatever you want.
Oh, excellent. What the hell am I doing in dairy? Like, I don't know a thing about dairy. Like, what am I doing? And I've learned a lot about dairy. And in Europe, for instance, it's one of the most important segments of agri-foods. And I saw a stat that, I don't know how true this is, but I think the number is pretty right, that 1 out of 10 families in the world somehow is fed or employed by some company or someone in the dairy agri chain, the dairy value chain. So it's a critical industry. So we work in broader dairy, traditional, sustainable, plant-based and cell-based and fermentation-based. And so to Isha's point, in a 100 milliliter glass of milk, 88% is just water, right? Mm-hmm. You got about 3 to 4% fats, 3 to 4% proteins, casein and whey, and a whole bunch of other nutrients, minerals, vitamins, things like that. And so what we're looking at, and what Isha's looking at from different perspectives, obviously, because we do different things, but we're looking at both how do you get that one-to-one protein, because the real value in milk is the protein and the fats, right? You think of butter, if you think of skim milk, if you think of cheese and whey, and cheese is really an amazing superfood in some ways. Overused term, I know, but it's a superfood. And so we're looking at various types, and this is sort of broader, what we're talking about in Canada, right? Future of food. Future of food, part of it is cell-based. Part of it could be advanced plant-based. Part of it could be how do we actually make the current animal-based farms more sustainable.
Okay, so what I like about where we're coming, because we're coming at this from different directions, and we're going to get from you like the bottom line argument. Why do you invest in something? Why does something make financial sense? What's intriguing to investors when it comes to the future of food? But what's driving your research? Is this more of an empathy thing? Is this more of an animal lover thing? Is this more of a sustainability thing for planet Earth and the humans on planet Earth? Like, what sort of drives you, Isha?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to clarify, this is a nonprofit organization that I run.
Yes.
And so it is driven by all kinds of motivations, but it's also driven by philanthropy. So we have donors who have all these different, interests that you've shared. My interest is, I like animals, but I still eat them, so can't like them too much, I guess.
Oh, I don't know. Can we dig into that?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Wow, what a fascinating. You like animals, but you still eat them, so you can't like them that much.
Well, I mean, aren't a lot of people like that?
Yeah, I am that person.
Oh my gosh, yes,
but it was like right up until the end when you said, so I can't like them that much, and I went,
I'm that person.
because I do consider myself to be a real animal lover, but I also like eat animals.
Yeah.
And also I participate in what society participates in, which is animal agriculture.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but my family, not me, but my family has a storied and proud history. 6 generations of dairy farming, one of the biggest dairy operations in Western Canada.
Really?
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots to
The
talk
Jespersen
about
dairy
them.
farms in Stony Plain, Spruce Grove, Westlock.
Wicked.
It's all resonating with you now, right? It's all
That
registered.
Jespersen.
So like I get it.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? If you consume animal products, can you call yourself an animal lover? I'd like to argue yes, but I get why you could eat easily argue no.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the animal thing is like kind of a motivation. Another motivation for me is we're heading into a climate change world. We don't know, the rules of farming are changing as we speak. The weather is changing as we speak. And we need to really diversify where our food comes from. And people don't realize that we dedicate about 1/3 of all the surface of land of this planet to farming animals for food. That is a huge, huge, huge amount of land that we're using to grow food, to feed animals, to feed us. And when you think about how risky the future is and how we're seeing, these climate events wipe out tens of thousands of cattle overnight, or even just those really gradual changes that see, different kind of pests emerge and all this kind of stuff, we realize we really need to just diversify our food system. And so for me, the growing food from cells is a way to secure our food future and diversify things. And it's very, very similar to what we see in energy. So if you think about it, animal agriculture to me is like coal. It's dirty and dangerous in many ways. It's kind of risky, but it serves millions and billions of people today. But as we head into a future, we need to just diversify where that food comes from. And so growing it from cells is one option. There's tons of other amazing options too, regenerative options, plant-based options,
So you told us you're the proud mother of someone of a little one that's having their first day of kindergarten.
Yes,
It's just had their first day of kindergarten. Do you envision a world where your children in their lifetime will be eating cheese and maybe steak and drinking milk and maybe whatever else? You can probably blow my mind on a million other examples that will all have been grown in labs. Do you think your children will see the day where animal agriculture, I guess you'd have to come up with a whole new phrase.
Yeah, there's a lot of different first days, They could be tasting milk and cheese made without animals today. I mean, that happened in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But if that's the norm, I don't know if that will happen in our lifetime. I'd like to hope that climate change has not progressed so much that we have to get rid of dairy altogether. You know what I mean? But I'd like to think that those options start to exist. And I mean, we in our lifetimes have seen the plant-based dairy category just explode and become so normal. I think this is just going to become another one of those options.
When you're talking plant-based dairy, are you talking about things like oat milk?
Yeah, oat milk, almond milk, all this stuff that has become so normal, and people did not used to order that 10 years ago.
7 to 10% of the Western country's population will only drink plant-based dairy.
1 out of 10.
Out of 10.
You know what? Actually, Sean, I would have guessed the number was higher.
In some countries, it is. In some countries, I don't have the stats on me, but the EU has done lots of research on this. In some of the Northern European countries, we're heading towards 15%.
And what do we know about these people and what is driving their decision?
We're seeing more and more flexitarians out there. We're seeing more and more people who want hybrid products. We can talk about what a hybrid product is in a bit. But part of it is, ethical or people's personal concept around ethics and climate change and global heating or global warming, depending on how we term it these days. Part of it is health. Some people just don't feel good eating animal products.
Yeah.
And they want to reduce animal consumption. Part of it is a bit of both.
So there could be like a million different reasons.
There's many different reasons.
If someone's lactose intolerant, it's pretty obvious.
Exactly. There are also health reasons, personal health reasons. So I would say, social ethics or personal ethics, personal health and wellness.
I don't know if either of you are experts in this, but I have done just a tiny little bit of reading on almond milk. We can't say they're not the silver bullet for sustainability, though, right?
No.
Like there's a lot of arguments against a product like almond milk.
We've done some projects in almond milk as well.
Have you?
Through our consulting arm.
Can you tell us about it? Because I know a lot of people are disciples of almond milk now. Is that?
Well, look, almonds are good for you. Almonds are protein rich, nutrient rich. There's nothing wrong with eating almonds. Almond milk is a perfectly decent product. There are a whole bunch of plant-based milks now, right? So it used to be soy was the biggest one, and then sort of fell out of favor for various reasons. I think part of it was stopped being trendy. Part of it was questions around GMO soy and that there are too many estrogens in soy and whatnot. And that's yes, but you have to drink like a tank full of soy milk in order to have any problems. So then oat milk's been a big thing with Oatly and various other sort of trendy brands. Almond milk's been around, but now there are pistachio milks or pistachio milks. There are hazelnut milks out there. There's hemp milk. We've tried hemp milk before. rice milk, potato milk. So, I mean, it's a limitless, almost, they're milking almost any sort of vegetable out there now.
I'm afraid to look into our live chat and see the comment. There's a lot of, we've got a lot of pun artists,
Yes.
people, dad
Yes.
joke aficionados in here. I'm going to stay away from but at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot of people. I don't know if I can go so far as to say the majority of people, but you're going to have a lot of people that may be open-minded to how the food is produced, but that they're still going to want that food to, like, they're still going to be looking for cow's milk, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
like,
for sure.
We hear that a lot when we talk about, like, for example, meat grown in a lab.
Yeah.
And I love these kinds of conversations.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
around the coffee shop or whatever. Like, would you eat a steak that's grown in a lab?
Yeah.
And for me, my thought is, like, I would prefer to try it first and then to find out later it was grown in a lab, because I wouldn't want my mind to be influencing what I thought of the taste and texture.
Totally.
And if the taste and the texture was the same, then quite frankly, to put it in dumbed down terms, why does an animal have to die?
Exactly.
Right? Like, and I think I feel like the majority of people, if the product was bang on, would be cool with seeing the method of production progress.
Absolutely. I think the product being bang on, though, is like the nose and the mouth and the tongue and everything are like the most sensitive sensors there are in the world. And like, how many of us have tried a plant-based thing and it's almost like this uncanny valley of meat where you're like, yeah, it's like really, really good, but it's not the
like
same
vegan
thing
hot dogs.
Yeah.
Or like terrible.
Yeah, and it's not terrible in some macro way. Like, you couldn't say
This is just my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, but you know what I mean. Like, you can't pinpoint why it's terrible. Like, it's way off.
The
I think
uncanny valley
sometimes
is very
there's
nice.
this-
That's a nice.
We have to loop in
perfect.
with his blessing. We have to loop in the intrepid producer of this
Please,
show,
yeah,
John
please.
Higgs.
Oh,
Johnny
no.
Johnny and I off air, we talk about stuff like this all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And Johnny, you've sort of like been on your own food journey, and like
Yeah.
out of a sort of a plant based at one point, your household and this, that, and the other.
vegan
Did you ever?
and
Yeah,
vegetarian
but one of the things I noticed about you is always like you did like all these like beautiful like salads or plant based dishes, but I've never really talked to you a lot about the kind of, what would you call them, like replacement. Like when I talk about a vegan smoky,
Right.
like, is that the type of thing that you've tried out? And if so, what
Sure.
was your? Did you? Are you down with it, or was?
Yeah, you're talking about hot dogs. I had 2 of them last night, but
Yeah.
but I'm down with this.
Yeah.
I would much rather, and people in the chat and people listening today are probably like, oh, grown in a lab. All our food is genetically modified nowadays. Like
all grown in a lab.
everything you're eating has been developed by scientists. So like
Exactly, well put.
Even the cow.
and now we're talking
Cows,
about like
chickens. I mean,
yeah, if we go to crazy surgeries these days where they're trying to like grow lungs and hearts and
Yeah.
limbs for people who've lost limbs, are you telling me that if somebody grew you a leg after you lost your leg and could medically, surgically attach it to you and give you a new leg, that you wouldn't have it?
Yeah,
Of
exactly.
course you would, but you're not going to eat a medically grown or lab grown steak. It
Interesting.
doesn't make
well,
sense.
and you
to
think
me.
about it, and Isha, I'm sorry because you're the scientist, and I keep jumping in here, but we work in sort of similar fields. But that's really the thing, right? If you think of a lab, if you think of the base technology or the base research that sort of underpins both, let's say, organs grown in labs or meat grown in labs for human consumption, the base research, the base technology is the same. I mean, this is your point always. Food science is bioscience, and food tech is biotech. So we shouldn't artificially draw those sorts of false dichotomies or false distinctions, in my opinion. And if you think of what's happening to a lab is the most pristine, controlled environment possible, right? Anything we put into our bodies, it's going to be regulated like there's no tomorrow. If you think of what's in the, like, I eat meat too. Okay, I eat chips, I eat all sorts of crazy things, as most of us do. But if you think of like, if you read every single ingredient on the bag of, on the back of a bag of chips, or in, let's say, beef jerky or something, can you really tell me what every single chemical is, what every single preservative is, what that's going to do to you over the next, 10 minutes, 10 days, 10 months, 10 years? No. So
Talk to us about this. You sent us a video, and so we'll describe it for our podcast audience.
Yes.
Johnny can show it to us. But you sent us a video of you tasting cell-cultured salmon with cell-cultured cream cheese, and you're hanging out with none other than the mayor of New York City, by the way, Eric Adams, as you're doing this. What a neat opportunity for you to hang out with Mayor Adams.
Yeah.
But cell-cultured salmon. So this is salmon that's grown in a lab.
Yeah.
And cream cheese as well. We're talking about cell-cultured dairy,
Yep.
so it's grown in a lab.
Yep.
And how would you describe the taste? How would you describe the texture for folks that love seafood? How is
Yeah,
the salmon?
absolutely. So the salmon was, just to be clear, it was like a raw cured salmon, so it was not cooked. So this company that makes the salmon called Wild Type, they make like a salmon sashimi. So the texture was like a lox.
Okay.
Not a dry. I don't know how's detailed about the salmons around here. And then the cream cheese was just like your regular plain cream cheese, and it was on a bagel. And there's been a lot of tastings of cell culture products around the world, but never one with two in one thing. And so we really wanted to do it up for this event we had with Mayor Adams, to have both at the same time. I mean, it was the same experience, to be honest with you. It was just
And it was like
bagel and cream cheese and salmon on top. It was
But
like,
with the average person, if a passerby at that market, this was, where were you at here?
so this was actually New Harvest Conference
Oh, this was
2022.
that you put on.
Yeah, that we put on in New York for several years, and Mayor Adams was a guest there. No, I don't think the average person would know the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can say that quite confidently.
We've got a friend of the show named Mark in the live chat right now, and he says, excuse me if I stick to the delicious lettuce, zucchini, cucumbers, beans, and golden beets that we've been
Yes.
harvesting fresh from our garden. Are there produce implications to the work that you and your team are doing, or are we talking more like quote-unquote animal proteins?
What Mark is
I know
doing
I'm
is
using
the best
I'm using
thing.
the wrong phrases, aren't I?
No, you're not.
'Cause
No, you know
but
what
you're
I
not
like?
saying
You're
animals.
not.
You
You're
say
not.
cellular. You don't say animal, right?
Well, I mean, depends what we're talking about. The terms have not settled yet. I mean, cellular agriculture, I think, has grasped some things, because we need to talk about this in this kind of academic sense. You know, what would an institute be called? What would a degree be called? But I think we're still figuring out the language in this very kind of organic way. But I want to say what Mark is doing is the right thing. Like, we actually don't need to invent these products if everyone ate the way that Mark does, right? I mean, we're kind of choosing the path of, you know, capitalism, investment, technology, which tends to be a path that's picked in the absence of policy, right? You know, like technology is the absence of policy. I sometimes defer to that. So unless we are making rules about we're going to limit the consumption of animal products because of some climate reason or sustainability reason or yada, 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 we have to innovate our way out
which
of it.
they've tried in the EU and in New Zealand.
What do you mean? Take it, because I was about to say I can't imagine a government trying to limit animal consumption. However, there's one way that governments limit consumption on a whole lot of things, and it's called taxes.
Right.
Right. And you could see some pretty interesting tax. I mean, the carbon tax would be a good example. Sin taxes is another example.
Well, look, in New Zealand, the former Labour government basically passed a law saying no new dairy farms. And so in New Zealand, dairy is 100%, I don't want to say the only game in town, but it's the biggest industry by far. Their biggest company is a dairy company. I mean, their stock and their commodities markets were developed basically to serve as the dairy industry. And so it's a country of dairy farms. And there are more cows in New Zealand than there are human beings. And the previous government said no new dairy farms. No way, it's just too bad for the environment. It's bad for the water, it's bad for the land, it's bad for CO2, for methane emissions, for greenhouse gas emissions. And I mean, there's going to be hell to pay. The new conservative government has backtracked on that. They tried something similar in Denmark in terms of basically putting a tax on so cows burp a lot. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, methane emissions.
Methane
are a
emissions,
thing,
and
for
it's a
sure.
big thing. And they've tried to actually in some European countries, and the Netherlands as well, and nitrogen runoff, and as I said, the Danish on methane emissions. So they're trying various types of taxes and policy levers. Let's see how this goes. This is very, very new. It's only been the last year they've tried this. But we saw, I'm not sure if you saw those here in Canada, but in Europe, I mean, I literally, in downtown Milan, had 40 tractors driving by my office. I actually have a video on my phone somewhere, just honking their horns because the farmers were so angry. Mm-hmm. In Brussels, we saw farmers literally taking like cow manure and then spraying it on politicians.
Right.
Literally. They had to call in the riot police in Brussels, the capital of the European Union. So there are policy levers in place. I'm not saying that they're right or they're wrong, or they're wrong, or that the right ones are the wrong ones, but we're seeing these being used in other jurisdictions.
I don't mean to like derail our conversation
No,
here, but
yeah.
in Canada, the government messes with with the dairy business.
Well, we supply management.
Supply
We
management.
supply
Now-
management.
Now, I'm not going to say that supply management is environmental policy, because it's most certainly not. It's economic policy. It's trade policy,
Yeah.
right? Industry policy. But governments do mess with
They do.
industry.
And they pick it, and they pick winners and losers all the
They
time.
do. Yeah.
They say they don't, but they do.
Yeah. You've talked about, Sean, which I think is really fascinating. You say the food ag transition is happening all over the world, but the future is already here. But here's what catches my eye of what you write. The food ag transition will be bigger than the energy transition. Both of those are magnificently massive transitions.
They are.
And I suppose you could probably find somebody that could argue energy over food ag or food ag over energy. But what would your argument be?
Well, again, Isha and I, talk all the time, and these are common thoughts. So it's not like I'm the genius here with all the ideas. I mean, what we
We're
wrote
not
down.
used to people on talk shows coming with humility and suggesting that they're not the definitive expert on something.
Well,
this is taking some getting used to.
We're a new sort of investment fund. We're a new sort of merchant bank. We're not, the Wall Street sharks who will try and, steal money from Main Street sort of thing. And that includes stealing intellectual property and ideas. So a lot of this was done through a very collaborative process. But I think Isha's point and this sort of iterative way of coming up with ideas is, in my opinion, sort of, the Industrial Revolution was 300 years ago, right? We started to industrialize, and we had the steam engine, and we had electricity and all sorts of things. And we're now, in the last 20, 30 years, trying to change how we've powered our systems over the last 300 years. What we're doing now is we're changing how we've actually fed ourselves since the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago. Since we became a sedentary population, since we stopped being hunters and gatherers in the forest, and since we started to domesticate crops and animals. So we're now changing how we fed ourselves for 10,000 years. That's a big change, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I mean, this is a new subsistence strategy. Like before the agricultural revolution, we were hunting and gathering. Yeah. So that was like a major technological change. 2,000-3,000 years ago or something, we started fermenting foods. I would argue this is like when biotechnology was invented. And I would also argue that what we're talking about, growing food from cells, is just more of that thing.
I mean, fermentation is the basic technology, right?
Yeah.
It's still the basic technology. Whether we're talking about fermenting, expressing certain macronutrients from microbes, or actually growing mammalian, sort of eukaryotic mammalian cells in a lab, it's fermentation is the base technology.
Isha, you've reiterated several times, and I want to let people know that they can check out more about the work that you and your team are doing. We'll obviously link to it all in the show notes, but at new-harvest.org, a nonprofit, you've pointed out a couple of times.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there haven't been economic implications and interest in the work and in the work tied to what you and your team have done, right? Like, can we talk about this? Like a couple of $1 billion in private investment,
yeah.
right? $50 million follow-on funding, 1,500 jobs created. I mean, these are the numbers that people that are intrigued in industry investment trends are going to pay close attention to.
Absolutely. So we, being in Alberta or being in Canada, we meet a lot of government workers whose jobs are to create an economic ecosystem or stimulate the economy in some way. We do that, except in a very, very, very narrow area, but it's narrow today, but it's going to be huge tomorrow. And so what we've done as a nonprofit organization is, how do we fund the research, ask the questions, find the answers that help this become a full-fledged industry? So cellular agriculture, growing food from cells, that combines a little bit of knowledge from medicine, a little bit of knowledge from food science, a little bit of knowledge from here, there, everywhere, fermentation, large-scale fermentation, all this kind of stuff. Those are fields that have not really talked to each other or crossed paths for like 100 years. How many universities or even funding agencies, you have the USDA for Ag, you have NIH for Health. This is something in the middle of those things. So we think of our organization as like a field building organization. We're not going to solve this problem by having one company that makes milk proteins in cell culture, or one company that makes meat in a lab. We actually need to come up with a whole training pipeline. So a high school student could be like, oh, I want to work in that field one day, and they know a degree they can go into to get there. We need to have research labs, institutions of cellular agriculture all over the world, just like you could study cancer in every kind of university around the world. We need a full industry and supply chain so that stuff grown in the ground on farms can feed into these huge bioreactors and turn that into like the foods that we're talking about. You know, it's like a whole ecosystem. So what my nonprofit does is try and put those pieces together, fill in those gaps. So naming cellular agriculture, for example, was just trying to create a new box around this intersection between food and medicine.
This is so cool. And by the way, our live chat is like all over what you two are presenting today. This is
Nice.
great. A
That's
Green
why we're
Tomato
here.
is reading about the history of fermentation. Starts as far back as 10,000 BC when the first human civilization emerged in a region called the Fertile Crescent, which is today's Middle East. Very cool.
Exactly.
And I don't know if this is true or not. I'm sure it is. I'm not saying Travis is lying to us. I've just never heard this before. This is amazing. He says the Inuit would catch a bunch of birds, put them in a seal stomach, and then bury it under rocks to ferment.
Yeah.
And would use it as a food source during the winter. I mean, that is just mind-blowing stuff here.
Absolutely.
When you talk about working, and I should mention, like I haven't even mentioned, like you've presented at TED, you've been featured in the New York Times, you've been featured on the Netflix series Explained. You did Robert Downey Jr.'s podcast, is that right?
Yeah.
The Downstream
It was
channel?
almost as
Like,
good as this one.
Almost. Oh, thank you. That's very, very kind of you to say. But a lot of people outside the province of Alberta, a lot of people outside Canada are paying attention to what you're doing. And when you say, but what's driving you, say personally, I asked you, what drives you about your work? You said it's the public good.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting. There's a lot of people, and I don't think that profit's a dirty word, by the way. I think that for-profit enterprises do a lot. I think
absolutely.
That, as a matter of fact,
that's why I kind of emphasize the nonprofit thing is like we're a nonprofit player, but at the end of the day, who is delivering value and delivering these products to people? It's for-profit entities. But it's nonprofits like us that can do things like advocate for research, talk to policymakers, actually generate real data and safety information, like things that need to be very, very neutral. And so when I say for the public good, I actually have a little bit of an opening there where maybe we decide that food from cells is not good. And then I'm down with not doing it. So I feel like we need to have some neutral entity that looks at this opportunity and says, let's go down this path and figure it out. But we have to be open to it not being the right thing or not being the best thing.
in other words, you don't want to go into research or R&D with a predetermined outcome. Or
Exactly.
with a
Yeah.
you know, I mean,
and if the research shows that this stuff is unsafe, or like you asked that question about my kid eating it, even that gave me a little bit of like, maybe I'd eat it, but I was pregnant during a period. I didn't taste anything then. I was just like, nah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, that's, I always try to, if you want to like really localize a story, really have a story hit home with somebody, ask them what would happen if it was your family member.
Yeah, exactly.
What happened if it was you?
Absolutely.
Exactly,
right?
absolutely.
You know, so Sean, interesting with you. I mean, I mentioned, you're born and raised Edmontonian, but obviously you've been living in Italy for almost 15 years. That's where you earned your PhD. But I have not mentioned that you have been quite involved at the highest level of Alberta politics as a chief of staff, as a political advisor, including to former premier, though while he was education minister, Dave Hancock. People will, of course, know Ed Stelmach. You've worked in those offices. What would be your assessment? Let's localize this a little bit. How well can you speak to where the province of Alberta is positioned here, to the federal government, where the government's positioned here? We know, obviously, once you start, if I know anything talking about transitions, and we talk a lot about the energy transition on this show, and we recognize climate change, we recognize where global investment is going, we recognize there are employment implications,
100%.
and we recognize for a lot of politicians and policy, these are real hot button issues, and they got to approach it carefully.
Yep.
Remember Andrew Scheer chugging the milk on stage at the
right? So look at Maxime Bernier, right?
Of course,
he said
talking about supply management,
and they voted, and then he lost the leadership.
Of
He
course.
lost the conservative
So
leadership.
politicians don't want to piss off big dairy. They don't want to piss off cattle ranchers.
I don't want to piss off big dairy either. Okay.
Yeah. So
we invest in traditional dairy. We commercialize traditional dairy. So this isn't about us versus dairy.
But let's talk about the politics of this. Let's talk policy.
Sure.
I'd be curious for your assessment of how Alberta and Canada are positioned here.
Well, I think, and that's why I come back often to do business here. I come back for family reasons as well, but we see lots of opportunities here. In fact, a lot of our investments, a lot of our potential investments, potential new clients for our advisory practice, even for our commercial practice, are in Western North America, and particularly Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan. And I'm running around like a crazy person between BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, talking to people. And there's lots happening here. So, for instance, and Edmonton is really a diamond in the rough for this sector. So, of course, we have the U of A, but we also have, throughout the entire, what I would call sort of scale-up chain, we have, for instance, Enotech, which is the largest public fermenter in North America. And there's like a 2 or 3 year waiting list. I visited it 2 years ago.
Can I just clarify what Initech is? So,
Sure, yeah.
So I at the TED conference, this guy came up to me, and his name is Don, and he's now on my board. But he came up to me and he said, who are you? Where'd you come from? I was like, oh yeah, I'm from Edmonton. He's like, oh, I built a 20,000 liter bioreactor in Edmonton in 1983.
You're talking about Don Gerson.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
1983. I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, we were growing purple carrot cells in this. And I was just like, that's crazy. First of all, there's Edmontonians hiding in plain sight all over the world. I love how we find each other somehow. But secondly, I realized that Edmonton has been so ahead of its time in this like fermentation, large scale biomanufacturing. You said we don't know the words. We can say all these words, but kind of cellular agriculture. Like we've actually been doing this for 40 years, coming out of the Peter Lougheed government, and this interest in diversifying our economy.
It's an incredible facility.
In the mid 80s. So we have this amazing facility that people all over the world come to scale things up into 20,000 liters.
There's like a 3 year waiting list to use this thing.
Yeah.
When I was there, I only had 20 minutes. It was that busy. Behind me, there's literally a line. There's a line of like companies or international experts from Germany that day. I think from Taiwan, for sure from Taiwan actually, from the UK and from France.
And so what this facility is usually you're doing little stuff in the lab. Okay, I want to grow purple carrot cells in the lab to make dye. I want to grow these microorganisms that make milk, and it's these tiny petri dish kind of size things. And eventually, if you want to make a real impact with that, you have to grow it in these gigantic, massive brewery-looking things. But who's going to buy that for just an experiment? So this facility is a place that really de-risks that scale-up, and it's so critical and important. But there's so few of them around the world, and we have the largest public one.
I'm just looking on their website right now, initekalberta.ca. They participated in that bitumen pucks development. Did you guys hear this story?
No.
CN, Canada's largest railway, had filed for a patent for a new technology that would convert bitumen into pucks to make it safer to ship, safer to transport. So we're not just talking about food here at this facility.
Oh,
but
no.
Then hang on a second. So you're the big investment guy. So if there's such demand here, but you know what I'm saying. This is your wheelhouse.
This is our bread and butter, sure.
So if there's such a demand for this, Edmonton's got the biggest one in North America, but there's a 3 year waiting list, and people are coming from Asia and Europe and all over the world.
Place,
Where's the investment in a second facility? Why isn't there another one?
That is exactly what I hope. That's the point of this show.
Yeah.
Not literally. I didn't think about that ahead of time, but that's what we're trying to do is we need more of that facilities. And your point about the bitumen pucks is important because that facility is actually not food grade. So you can grow food things in there, but it's more designed for other large scale fermentation projects like fertilizers and, it could be anything. Honestly, you can grow anything with biotech. You can grow anything with cells. It's like oil and gas. You can make anything. You can grow anything. We need another one that's for food because the regulations and the specifications are all very different. But that's what we need. And so the real point that I'd want to drive home in this hour is that we know the energy transition is huge. There's an ag transition that's happening, and it's an ag transition into biotech, into growing stuff from cells, and we need to be prepared with the infrastructure to support that. And Alberta has the basis to be a huge leader in this field because we grow all the stuff that's going to go into that bioreactor.
I was actually talking to an ex-Tesla executive, and she's wonderful, and she's worked all over. She's worked in New York for HSBC and worked for Tesla and has worked here and there and has lived in 4 different countries. And what she was saying is one of the most incredible ecosystems right now for food and ag tech is in Alberta.
Wow.
So and there's several funds who are working in this field. There are several companies working in this field, not just in Alberta, also in Western Canada, also in other parts of Canada. But in Alberta, we have a really good advantage. And also just moving more broadly, back to your point about policy. So the feds have a supercluster program, and they have a supercluster. So one of the superclusters is on sort of what they call alternative proteins. I don't really like that term. I prefer complementary proteins or sort of protein diversification. What the feds have been doing now, they have a group called PIC, Protein Industries Canada. They've been around since 2018, and it's basically their job to get, I think it's around $500 million out the door to add value to Canadian crops. And so those Canadian crops can be feedstock for cell egg. It can be they can be used as feedstock for advanced plant-based ingredients, new plant-based products. There's lots of interest from and consumers. Actually, are very sophisticated, right? So one of the biggest things I've heard in various conferences and fairs and discussions is around hybrid products. And so consumers are ready for hybrid products as long as they taste good, as long as they're good for you. So going back to our earlier discussion,
As a matter of fact, they would seek them out, I think.
they would seek them
And
out.
I would also
They would
argue
seek them out, for sure.
that not every consumer, but many consumers are willing to even pay a little bit more.
They are, as long as they're tasty. And so the reason, we had the plant-based 2.0 movement or 3.0, whatever, in 2019, 2020 with, I don't want to name drop, with Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods and blah, blah, blah. And those were really amazing. Yeah. But after a couple of years, it's like, are they as good as the real thing? We don't know. Are they as tasty? We don't know.
Yeah, look at
so
this.
As long as the taste and the flavor profile is there, customers are interested and they're open-minded.
I'm sharing my screen right now. I'm not an investment expert at all, but I have been casually following the story of Beyond Meat, and the stock has just plummeted.
It has.
Yeah.
It has.
It was trading at just about $12, just over $12 a year ago. It's trading at $6.20 US.
Well, in
as we're talking
2019, a lot of these companies that IPO'd were very, very overhyped.
Okay.
There's a bubble,
Yeah.
right? And so they've come back to earth after 4 or 5 years. And that's just the market correcting itself. And it's also based on the fact that, on Main Street, consumers are, they've sort of got over the hype. But there's still a business to be had there. And I think what the Feds
you
are
don't
doing,
want, like Isha,
The market's flooded as well now.
and the market is very saturated.
More players
and the market is
coming.
very saturated now, right? So every incumbent, every private label player now has something that matches Beyond Meat, whether you're using soy protein or pea protein or whatever.
I don't
Everyone
think
is
the
doing
market
it
is
now.
saturated. I think there's a lot of options, but you asked this question earlier. Why do we need the real milk from cows when we have the almond and all this kind of stuff? My problem with the Beyond Meat and Impossible and stuff is that it isn't meat, and so the way your body responds to it is different. There's
I meant
different.
saturated in terms of plant-based alternatives, like
No,
all the
I understand that, but I'm saying that the saturation of the market, I'm not talking about saturated fats, is
Neither was I.
is different because it's stuff from plants. But if we had stuff that performed differently and had the functionality of dairy products and real meat products and whatever, that's like a different value proposition, right? I mean, I think we talked about that. It's a different thing. Like even the dairy alternatives, you have to get the one for coffee and the one for cereal, and they don't work in all the different functions. You can't bake with them all the same. You can't make custards all the same.
I don't think you can bake with any of them. I might
Well,
be
I
wrong.
don't even-
I'm not a baker.
I've never
don't
even
ask
tried.
me.
I've
but
never
I
tried.
don't- yeah.
all of the plant-based milk companies have kitchen companions, so like creamers, baking products.
I see.
Right, but
I mean,
the point is that
I
they're
never
not
bake, by the way, so don't listen to me.
It's all good, but
Me neither, but
But if you
we
have
to
the
look
same
at this stuff.
proteins, you should be able to make cheese, bake, yogurt, all this kind of stuff in the same way you do with milk. So it should be like a plug-in for milk rather than a substitution that needs to be treated in some special way. And I think that's still a huge barrier for plant-based alternatives because, you cook them differently, you work with them differently.
That's very true, but one thing that kills me is we're stuck on proteins, right? So we talk a lot about proteins, and proteins are very important, don't get me wrong. But in the West, we typically consume too much protein in our diets. We don't consume nearly enough fiber. So we should be talking also about the fats, the good fibers, the good carbs. And so I totally agree. We need to get to that one-to-one protein. So again, we don't really invest in meats. We invest more in the dairy. We call the dairy ecosystem, right? So combination of plant-based, animal-based, and novel tech. And there we're seeing a lot of work happening on the protein space. So we've actually tasted, precision fermentation-based mozzarella. And the Italian listeners are going to kill me, but whatever. And being based in Italy, they're going to be completely pissed off with me, but I don't care. It's pretty good. It's as good as because industrial mozzarella is not the stuff that's made, by the small farmer in his workshop.
If you
It's
start talking
very
about
industrial.
Parmesan, we might get an more interesting response.
I'm not going to even touch that because we actually do business with those people, and they're very nice people, and it's a great product, and we're not going to touch.
We found his
We're not
kryptonite.
we're not going to touch Parmigiano Reggiano ever,
kryptonite is Parmesan.
ever.
But I think the other thing is that with cheese and meat, there's such a wide range of quality just in
there is.
the real thing, right? So
That's exactly
we could
in-
have that
industrial
range in
cheese.
the alternatives.
I've got to be careful what I say here because we work very, we're very much involved in traditional dairy still. We want there to be dairy farms in the future. We want farmers to succeed, absolutely. And we want there to be farms that are making the most amazing artisanal cheeses, just like they were made 500 years ago. We don't want to touch that. But in terms of commodities, in terms of hybrid products, again, so going back to my earlier point, the proteins we're getting somewhere in terms of cell egg. The fats hasn't been as easy. There are many companies working on fermentation-based fats or cell egg-based fats. Hasn't been as easy. Lipids are complicated. Lipids structurally, biochemically, are very, very complex. So right now, like for instance, Perfect Day, a company that you know very well because you co-founded it, company we know well because we've invested in it. We know the management team very well and the board very well. They're using the proteins made in the lab, but they haven't got the fats made in the lab. They just don't have them yet. They haven't scaled them up. So they're using advanced plant-based fats. So those are hybrid products, right?
Yeah, but that's good. Like we don't need to reinvent every single thing. Like
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All this talk about fermentation, Justin in our chat says beer is indirectly responsible for modern civilization.
Totally.
100%.
He says part of the process was boiling water before we knew about sanitizing water. So it was being purified as part of the process, and we didn't even have any idea. And I love this. I apologize, I forgot, or I can't see who said it, but back earlier in this chat, somebody said, well, kelp is apparently a solution to maybe decreasing methane emissions from cows.
Yeah,
and I'm just using this, but I
we've
want to
looked at
plug.
that.
But
We've
I want to
looked at that.
plug.
We've
I got to
looked at
plug a previous episode of Real Talk.
Yeah.
Johnny, you'll remember back on May 3rd, we talked to Blake McWilliam as part of our Storytellers Roundtable, a filmmakers roundtable. Blake McWilliam produced and directed Send Kelp, which is a really interesting documentary about a small operation, a startup out on the West Coast. They're growing kelp, particularly. They believe they're bullish on obviously the market for kelp, but they do believe that kelp could play a big role in the future of dairy farming. So you look cynical. They don't. I don't think that they believe that it's the be all end all solution.
It's one possible solution. I mean,
Yeah.
methane's a big problem, and methane emissions from dairy and from beef production is a reality. Kelp is one solution, like kelp or red algae is a solution, but not every single dairy farm is close to a lake or an ocean.
Right.
Some of are you really going to truck in all the kelp you need to feed cows? Let's say you've got a dairy farm somewhere in rural Quebec or in Manitoba. Are you really going to truck in kelp and red algae?
But it might work for all the dairy farms in Abbotsford.
Sure,
Well, I mean,
exactly.
I
So
think
it's one solution out of many. It's
Yeah.
one tool out of a multifaceted toolbox.
I think that comes back to this point that we just need this more diversification. I actually think
Absolutely.
we need all the solutions, and they probably need to regionalize a little bit, and we might need to make farming look a little bit more like it used to, where each farm was like kind of different in their operations, right?
But that's the thing, right? And that's to your point. It's not just about everything we should eat in the future. It needs to be grown in the lab. That's not what I'm saying. That's what you're saying either.
Right.
If we really want to make a difference in terms of, climate change and emissions and soil use and land use and water pollution, we need to invest in innovation in traditional ag.
It's
more
all
than
hands on
anything
deck.
else.
Yeah.
Right. So it's what's happening in the lab, what's happening on farms that are growing crops and fruits and vegetables, but also how do we innovate on dairy farms? Like, what does regen ag actually look like?
Mm-hmm.
There have been some questions in our chat about sort of scalability here, and if would it be possible to have enough lab space and enough technicians, a big enough operation to, and you've kind of already said you're not looking to close down the farms. You don't think that the future of ag includes replacing all of animal agriculture, but when you're if you're talking about getting rid of cattle ranches or getting rid of dairy operations, scalability wise, do you see a world where that could possibly be happening, or is that not even, you think, an intended or intended outcome?
Well, so the world that I like, the image I want to plant in your mind is the image of the brewing industry today. So you have these massive facilities that are brewing beers that everyone has access to. I'm not going to name names because we all know them. But we also have the small breweries that are doing their
craft
own special
brewers,
crafty things and cool things and local things, and not everything is out in a big facility kind of outside of the city. And so that's what I would like this future of cellular agriculture to look like. Like, there might be some larger facilities that are growing food that's kind of more on the commodity side, but we also have this opportunity for a lot of smaller artisanal producers to be making food. So for me, a big topic is like the IP of it. I think this should be, this is me, my own personal conviction is that I don't think this should be something that people should be able to own, because we should all be able to produce our own food. And if we produce our own food, we should see the kind of diversity that comes from being able to grow it and all this kind of stuff.
It's kind of the spirit of the polio vaccine developed in Canada.
Yeah,
many years ago.
spirit of vaccines, insulin, beer. Also, I mean, there's IP, but there's also kind of not.
Insulin's interesting.
Yeah.
Insulin, actually, talking about insulin.
I mean, insulin is basically.
That's exactly right.
Insulin is basically the first cell ag product. It used to come from the pancreas of an animal.
Exactly.
And the guy, when they invented it, they said, okay, we have to not rely on animals anymore, because they used to have a train full of pancreases coming in from slaughterhouses and so on.
Really?
And they'd have to distill it down to make insulin. And they're like, oh, there's only so much insulin we can ever have. We're going to reach peak insulin because we need so much pancreases. And we're so dependent on the farming industry to do that. And so they decided to create insulin by taking the gene, just like I said about the milk earlier, taking the gene for insulin, putting it in a microorganism, and having that microorganism spit it out. And so now, that's the first
So
cell
if you're
product.
a diabetic, my question would be, would you rather have insulin from a lab or from the pancreas of a dead animal? Right, because those are the current alternatives.
Yeah. I want to touch on this too. Alberta ranchers in our chat, and like not everybody's going to be, not everybody wants to even have these conversations, right? Like Alberta rancher says, holy shit, I'm going to get into my government subsidized John Deere Gator and go for a ride on my stolen land. I've heard enough of this shit. No matter what you, and I feel like both of you have been like absolutely reasonable, and you've reiterated that you think that existing animal industry should continue, and you've talked about how you invest in. No, let me finish first. You've talked about how you invest in dairy farms and stuff like that, but it just goes to show that some folks, and I know Alberta Rancher to be a friend of this show, but like some folks just don't even want to have this conversation at all.
I'm drinking milk right now.
Right.
There's real milk in this cup of coffee.
But I sort
and
of
it's really
we
good.
get the same thing with people if we talk. We have a big solar sponsor on this show, Kubi Renewable Energy, right? The founder of that company worked in oil and gas for many years. He's not an enemy of the oil and gas industry. But if you talk about sustainable energy or the energy transition, you're going to get a lot of people telling you to fuck off, right? Because they figure that you're coming for their job, right?
But
you're trying to take food off their family's table.
No one's trying to take anyone's job.
No, but this is the point is, even if we don't want to talk about it, people are talking about it. And
it's happening in Singapore. It's happening in the UAE. It's happening in the US. It's going to happen in Europe at some point. It's happening in China. I mean, it's
I think
happening.
we have to talk about it because it's either going to happen to Canada or it's going to happen in Canada.
That's right. Exactly.
And I want it to happen in Canada, and that means we have to own it and talk about it right now. And I don't want this to be another Canadian story where we dig stuff out of the ground, put it in a train, ship it somewhere else, and then buy what someone else makes out of it for 100 times the price back.
And Alberta, we should understand that analogy very, very clearly.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Heroes of wood, haulers of water. We're the only G20 country, I think, whose economy is still based primarily on natural resource extraction.
Yeah.
We're the only one.
And
which is incredible.
We're used to this story from the kind of, oil and gas sector, but we're used to it from the ag sector too. I mean, most of the Dijon mustard in France is made with stuff grown on the Canadian prairies. People don't know that when there's a Dijon shortage,
didn't know that.
it's because of what happened in Canada, not of what happened in France.
I heard from an ATB ag finance guy. I don't know how true this is, but he told me that 40% of all the oats in Oatly, any glass of Oatly milk in the world, comes from northern Alberta.
Yeah, that's true.
So I mean,
and also the Beyond Meats and all those things, that's grown with
peas are from
Canadian
southern
yellow
Alberta.
peas.
Yeah.
So we're already kind of replicating this Canadian story where we grow the stuff. We have amazing produce, amazing farms growing things on the land sustainably, and then we're shipping it somewhere and then buying it back. Why are we not at least mixing the mustard with the vinegar here and selling it at 10 times the price here, So for me, cellular agriculture is this chance to create like the refineries of the prairies. How often do we talk about how Alberta missed this opportunity by not having our own refineries in our own province? We need to do that here. Initech is like the refinery of the prairie. We're feeding it primary agricultural inputs, turning into high value products. This is like the same story over and over, and why food and ag is the same as energy. It's all about value adding. we need to do that for all the stuff that we can grow on the land here. And otherwise we're just shipping it away for nothing. Canada has all the cards to be a leader in pretty much everything, but this thing is like so obvious that we need to get a grip and just do it.
As we this time has flown by the way.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. We knew this was going to be an enlightening and interesting conversation. Lauren in our chat says that these two guests, he says, this is one of my favorite episodes in Real Talk history. We're coming up on 4 years.
Wow.
So that's saying,
Nice.
so we're coming up on 1,000 episodes. So that's
huge
saying
compliment.
something.
Yeah.
But as part of, I was telling you a little bit about the spirit of the tradition of our Friday roundtables. And at the end, we always like to ask our panelists, our experts, to kind of give us something to think about. I feel like each of you have given us about 1,000 things to think about.
Yeah.
But in closing, as we thank you for your time, what's one thing you would ask the audience to walk with and think about through the weekend, or maybe a closing thought? Sean, we'll go to you first.
That's a great question. I guess I would sort of respond to Alberta Rancher and say the beauty of being a democracy is we can have these discussions and disagree and, still be, citizens afterwards and friends afterwards. And the beauty of living in a market economy is people should be able to go to the supermarket and buy beef, 100%. People should be able to go to the supermarket and buy plant-based products. And again, we think, the food ecosystem is going to be a mix of plant-based, animal-based, new tech. And I think Alberta and Canada actually are well-positioned to take the excellence we have here, the excellent raw materials we have here, the excellent, manpower. Forgive me sometimes. I'm not sure. Can I say manpower anymore? I don't know.
I mean, you can say whatever you want to deal with the consequences. How's that?
I'm used to speaking in Italian more than English these days. So, but we have, the human brain capacity here. We have great research centers. We have great universities. We have great colleges. We have great technical institutions. I think, to Isha's point, we should be capitalizing where we are now. I think nonprofits, various levels of government, and private sector, and entrepreneurs, and funds should be working together to make the most of this opportunity.
Last word to you, Isha.
As someone born in Saskatoon and grew up in Edmonton, I think it's safe to say that people from the prairies are spoiled by our bounty. We have so much, and so it's easy to say things like we don't need to change because why change it if it isn't broke? Why fix it? But we live in a global ecosystem, and you would say one of the most advanced kind of ag places in the world right now is Singapore. They want to grow 30% of their food within their borders by 2030. It's a 30 by 30 goal. Singapore is like a tiny, city state. It's like they have no land.
Tiny island off a tiny peninsula.
Yes, it's the opposite of Alberta. They do not have that bounty. But they're pushing forward cellular agriculture, and I don't want to live in a world where Alberta's role in the world is that we're shipping beautiful things, beautiful primary agricultural inputs like sugar beets, sugar and canola inputs and whatever, all the way to Singapore. So Singapore can feed their country within their borders using these big fermentation tanks and so on. And then they sell it back to Canada. Like it's enough of that. Like Canada needs to grab a hold of its economy and start actually innovating and use all this bounty to keep things going on over here,
I love the vision. You can check out more about what Isha and her team do at new-harvest.org. I do want to follow up on the comment about G20 countries because we got another rancher in the chat. This is great. Shout out to our rural audience members. Horse Lake Ranch says, we have a natural resource economy because we have natural resources. Countries from around the world would love to have what we have.
Totally agree. We're very fortunate here. Let's build on it.
Yeah.
So again, we can still sell beef and raise animals.
The world's best beef.
The world's best beef. Really, the world's best beef is in Alberta. I eat red meat. I eat animal products, right?
Yeah.
But we can also do other things, like Isha was saying. It's not one or the other. We should stop drawing these false dichotomies, right?
But also that point of other countries in the world would love what we have. I mean, exactly. What if they start buying up our land to grow? That's exactly right. That's why we need to make the most of it. Yeah.
That's Isha Datar, Executive Director of New Harvest. We've also been hanging out with Dr. Sean Yam, COO of Gerber Rauth on the fast track to see. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not trying to create awkward moments around your boardroom table. Thank you to both of you for talking to us about the future of food. We had high expectations of this, and you delivered, and I guarantee that everybody watching or listening has learned something. We appreciate your expertise. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, you bet. And Real Talkers, we want to know what you think about this. I'm expecting, Johnny, if we know anything about how our email inbox goes after episodes like this, we're going to get feedback on all kinds of areas. We're going to get cheese aficionados writing in, and we're going to have researchers writing in, and probably students. Our younger audience will be fascinated in this for sure. talk@ryanjespersen.com is where you can send us that email. These conversations on Real Talk happen with the support of partners like our friends at McBain Camera, and we're super excited for the team at McBain. They're holding their grand opening coming up. This is the Edmonton Mayfield Square grand opening tent event on Saturday, September 7th from 10 to 4 p.m. 10 a.m., 4 p.m., an outdoor trade show with all the photo industry's biggest heavy hitters, including Nikon. You can come check out the brand new Nikon Z6 III full-frame mirrorless camera, the flagship Z9 and latest Z series lenses, plus more than $10,000 in door prizes to be given away, including a Nikon Z30 camera kit. You can learn more at mcbaincamera.com/grand opening. Also, a big shout out to our friends at Vine Arts. I was talking to you yesterday about how much I love shopping at Vine Arts. They've got a beautiful shop down in Calgary, and their shop in Edmonton, well, they're getting set to celebrate their 1-year anniversary. You can learn more about it by checking them out online at vinearts.ca. You go, really, Ryan? Like you love shopping at a wine store? Why do you love shopping at a wine store? I love how they've organized the entire shop. So if you're looking to serve your guests or serve your family or enjoy personally, a certain type of wine, but you look in a store and it's just all Italian wine together or Spanish wine together or French wine together, well, that's not helping you if you're looking for something like crisp and refreshing or bold, or if you're looking for like a flavor profile. Vine Arts is Alberta's best source and have a fabulously curated wine selection. Their craft beer fridge is among the best I've ever seen, and of course they're experts in some of the spirits that I really enjoy, like scotch and bourbon and tequila. Their first birthday bash goes on the 14th of September from 12 to 7 at the brand new Vine Arts location, just 1 year old on 109th Ave and 124th Street. Our congratulations to them. We're really proud to partner with our friends at Friesen Brothers. We should mention, after all this, Friesen Brothers has an amazing plant-based section.
Oh, yeah, they're going to be out of Veg Fest this weekend. They've got one of the most busiest. Every time we have Veg Fest, I'm going to be there on Saturday. The Friesen Bro tent is where everyone's lined up. Everybody. Right? Oh, yeah.
I love it. So while they're known and built on their butcher shop, Friesen Brothers coming up on 75 years now, still family-owned. They've got it all. They offer it all. And I just wanted to mention something as well that you talked about community. Friesen Brothers, we have an update for you. Remember how we were talking to you when you're at the till at a Friesen Brothers, consider making a donation to the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade? Johnny, the numbers are in. Friesen Brothers customers, can you believe this? Customers contributed $99,275. Friesen Brothers is matching with an additional $50,000, which means $150,000 is going to the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade. They're going to use that for equipment upgrades, volunteer training, and other critical needs that will enable that fire brigade to continue its services. That's thanks to you, to Friesen Brothers customers that did what you could at the till and made a donation to the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade. By the way, if you'd like to hear more about what Jasper's doing with its fire department, we talked to Jasper Mayor Richard Ireland yesterday. That would be our August 29th episode. They have an update there, an encouraging one. You can find that on our podcast archive or, of course, on our YouTube channel.
Talking about that wine, that's one of my favorite artificially made foods.
Artificial? That's about as legit and natural as it gets. But
well,
that's another example.
Artificial is anything that doesn't occur naturally that humans have made.
Yeah,
right?
I guess
we fermented things.
Goats,
we did it.
If goats in the fields would have been trampled, they say that in Ethiopia, they say that goats are the root of coffee.
Yeah.
Because apparently, like, shepherds saw goats dancing around and jumping around and all hyper, and they found that they had been eating the coffee beans. This is as the legend goes. And that was when coffee, obviously, the root of coffee in Ethiopia, that was due to goats. Fascinating. I wonder if goats were stomping on grapes, and maybe somebody, I don't know.
Listening to that conversation was great. I love that our chat, like a lot of them disagreeing, but just enjoying these guests, because Isha said it best. I mean, this is going to happen to us. It's not going to, we're going to have a discussion about it. It's going to happen. You know why?
Yeah.
Money talks. As soon as lab-grown meat provides the same amount of protein, the same texture, and a great taste, and is cheaper than the beef that's currently on the shelf, everyone's going to buy it.
I don't know if everyone's. I would disagree with you on everyone, but I think that I think there's.
Come on.
No, I would disagree that everyone, but I guarantee more people would consider buying it. But it doesn't have to be a competition. Like you don't get the vibe from them that they're looking to phase out existing industry. I think they're just they're responding like industries evolve. This is not a bad.
But if we're
thing,
talking about
right?
using 98% less land and 85% less water and all these things, I mean, how it's like a no-brainer to me. I mean, I love the taste of meat too. I wasn't a vegan from birth or a plant-based from birth. I did different phases in my life. I've had stages where I ate eggs again and I ate this again, and man, if I've traveled, places where I've had delicacies that are meat because I'm like, I will never experience this again. I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But if somebody gave me the chance to have all those things, all those tastes, and like you said, like she was saying today, and all these animals we love didn't have to suffer. To me, it's a no-brainer. And the way the world's going, water's the new oil. I mean, there's going to be a battle for water after we're out of oil.
Yeah.
And water is, I mean, man, to grow beef and to grow all types of meat, water is just, it takes so much water, right? So I just don't see how once all these things become just as good as normal meat, and I don't want to say normal because it's not like artificial is not the word, because we're growing this from animals, right? It's being grown from the cells of animals. So
Yeah.
I just feel like I can't wait. Let's get this going. And one more point before I get back to you. I's just so right. Like Alberta's being held back. I feel like we could be the leaders in so many things.
Well, we are,
and we're not. We are, but we could be the leaders in so many more things, and we're being held back, and this is one of them.
Justin says, come on, Johnny, there's going to be bros that refuse to eat fake anything.
Yeah, but those bros are going to die eventually just like we are, and thinking's going to change. I'm not talking about in 5 years everyone's going to be eating lab-grown meat, but as population increases, as water becomes more scarce, as land becomes more scarce, it's just a no-brainer that this is going to happen.
100%. And I really appreciated the spirit of their comments and kind of, how they approach what they're doing. Interesting to talk to someone that's the COO of a big investment firm, and somebody who's working for a nonprofit, right? Like that was also very cool.
Nice contrast.
Yeah. We're going to change gears. There was obviously some really tough news, as this is where we'll switch into kind of a daily talk show mode and address some of the things that are happening around us as well. I just wanted to mention the horrific passing of NHL superstar Johnny Gaudreau. Johnny Gaudreau, of course, a beloved alumni of the Calgary Flames for many years. He's one of the most skilled players to ever don the Flaming Sea. And tragic news breaking just a couple of hours before we recorded this episode. Johnny Gaudreau, now with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and his brother Matthew have both died as a result of a car accident. An alleged drunk driver hit both Gaudreau brothers while they were riding bikes. Johnny, on the eve of their sisters,
in New Jersey,
on the eve of their sister's wedding.
This is
and
horrible.
I just like it. You find it difficult to even try to process, let alone talk about a tragedy like this. But this is just an absolute gut punch for obviously anybody that knew Johnny and his brother Matthew Gaudreau, also just I think for the hockey community writ large. I can't even, a friend of mine texted me this morning and just said that family. You think of their sister that was to be married today, and I just can't even imagine. Police have arrested and are have charged or have booked anyway.
Charged on 2 counts of auto
he's
death.
Been charged,
death by auto. Yeah.
So you just think, just another. He was driving a Grand Cherokee. I don't even know if the details matter, but trying to pass somebody, driving recklessly, struck both brothers who were riding their bikes. Mark is absolutely right. Watching us from Utah this morning, says this death is a grim reminder to never drink and drive.
I was just going to say that ahead of the long weekend, guys, and I don't want to say we've all done it, but we all go out and we have a glass of wine and we have a beer at dinner or whatever. We think it's okay. My wife is this adamant person who always texts me when she knows I'm out and says, "Do not drive tonight. I know you're there. I know you're having fun. I know you've had a beer. I know you've had some dinner, and maybe you think you're full and you can have 2 more." Guys, this weekend, especially after this happening, the long weekend, last weekend of summer, everyone's going to go out and have fun. Please pass the keys. Put them somewhere else.
Yeah, so true. Gary Bettman, commissioner of the National Hockey League. Everybody's issuing statements. Virtually every franchise, many hockey players. I know that some people may even just be hearing about this for the first time on the show here. But so says the commissioner. Johnny's infectious spirit for the game and his show-stopping skills on the ice earned him the nickname Johnny. I'm sorry. Johnny Hockey. He was more than just a dazzling hockey player. He was a doting father and a beloved husband, son, brother, and teammate who endeared himself to every person fortunate enough to have crossed his path. He often told the story of how his dad taught him to skate as a kid in his home state of New Jersey. His dad, if I remember the story correctly, Johnny, his dad ran a rink. And so Johnny would go with his dad to the rink every single day and skate for hours and hours and hours. Says the commissioner of the NHL. He carried that same youthful passion through his 11 NHL seasons. 7-time NHL All-Star, and obviously beloved member of the community. So, to Flames fans, to Blue Jacket fans, to hockey fans, to anybody that knows the Gaudreau family, this is just your heart is shattered at hearing this. I can't imagine. They have 2 sisters. I can't imagine the parent. The 2 kids, I don't really know what to say.
And he's got 2 sons. One of them is namesake Johnny.
The
breaks
other,
my heart.
He's got a kid, Noah. So a little daughter, I think. So. We just wanted to touch on it. We wanted to mention it. I don't really know what to say except for it's just the fucking worst. And don't drink and drive, right? And also just every day, you can't really. It's been a weird year. 2024 has been a really tough year, and I think of the Jasper wildfire. We think of people have experienced loss and death, and it just I don't know. And you can't live every moment like it's your last because it's just not. It's not realistic. It's not how we can operate. You can't sort of treat every goodbye with a friend or every goodbye with a family member like it's your last goodbye or you'd never leave. I get that, but also. Just a reminder that every single day is precious, and we never know when our time will come. And just feel sick about this, and just wanted to mention it and talk a little bit about Johnny Gaudreau. Obviously, most people are going to be talking about Johnny. His brother died too, right? His brother, who was also a hockey player, who had played pro in the East Coast League, and. It's just his brother Matthew, and our hearts go out to the entire family. And I know that a lot of people are really having a difficult time. I see what's happening in our live chat as soon as we mentioned this. People commenting on it. Adventure Cycling says, "I'm just gutted this morning. My heart goes out to their family." It's really hit him hard. I happen to know Adventure Cycling is a survivor of a cycling crash, so sustained a serious brain injury. So that's the context there.
Right ahead of the season too. I mean, I'm sure we'll see tributes at all the opening matches for the NHL. So
yeah, absolutely. You and I, speaking of Jasper, are going to be contributing. Relay, our parent company, and Real Talk is proud to be sponsoring and contributing to a Jasper wildfire benefit concert, and we wanted to invite all of you to join us here. This is going to be downtown Edmonton, coming up on Saturday, September 7th. And from 5 to 10 p.m., I'm going to be hosting it. You're going to be DJing it, which I think is going to be so much fun. And we've got some it's $20 a ticket, and they have just gone on sale on on Eventbrite, and we want to invite all of you to join us to this. They've done a really, really great job of putting together like some excellent bands. The Prairie States are going to be there. They're one of my favorite bands as well, and that's just part of the lineup. It's going to be going on downtown at that ATB Plaza on Jasper Ave, kind of right across the street from the Fairmont Hotel McDonald. You know, that big ATB tower. There's a big plaza there, and we're hoping to see thousands and thousands of people. That's Saturday, September 7th. If you go on Eventbrite and check out the Jasper Wildfire Benefit Concert, we'll link to it in our show notes. That's where you can get your tickets. $20, all the proceeds to charity. We're doing everything we can to help Jasper residents, the workers, the businesses in Jasper, get back on their feet as soon as possible, and obviously hoping to raise a ton of dough on this one. So circle your calendars, Saturday, September 7th. If you already have plans, cancel them and join us. Again, tickets on Eventbrite from 5 to 10 p.m. on the 7th of September.
I like that it starts early, so those people who don't like to stay out late, come by between 5 and 7, show your support, and we're still thinking about Jasper, and watch yesterday's show with the mayor.
Yeah. He's sure an impressive guy. Hey, you know what I found out before and I want to mention something about Richard Ireland. I did not know until after I talked to him yesterday that it was his birthday, or I would have wished him a very happy birthday. But Richard Ireland has just done an unbelievable job demonstrating true leadership through an unimaginable challenge for his community, the community of Jasper. And we talked to him yesterday. You know, the economy in Jasper is reliant and is driven by tourism dollars. And so while one of the storylines that we're following is the return of residents to Jasper, those that are able to return right now, those that have housing, there's also people that have lost their businesses or have lost the businesses that employ them. There's people that don't have a job to go back to, and obviously many people are working hard behind the scenes to get tourism opportunities back open as soon as possible. We asked the mayor about that on August 29th. How are you balancing getting the town ready for residents, doing everything in kind of a measured and strategic approach, rolling that return out properly, and getting the tourism industry and those operators in Jasper kick-started as soon as possible? Can you take us into that process?
Sure. And as you recognize, Ryan, Jasper is a tourism-based community. The visitor economy is our local economy. And so we know that as residents come back, one of the things that they will need is employment. They will need income, and that in almost all cases relies on the return of visitors. So with our industry partners, we are preparing for the opportunity to welcome visitors into the community. And as you said, Ryan, you know Jasper. Many of your visitors know Jasper. You know us to be an authentic community with really warm hospitality, and all of that will return just as soon as we can make it safe for visitors like yourself and your listeners to come back to the community.
You can check out that full interview with Jasper Mayor Richard Ireland on our August 29th episode on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. We also had an interesting week talking to a couple of lawyers, Jeff Rath and Eva Chipiuk, behind a class action. They're suing the Alberta government and the feds on behalf of some of the people that have joined the class action anyway, that are claiming vaccine injuries. There have been negative health outcomes to the vaccine. We talked to Timothy Caulfield about it a little bit, which kind of prompted that interview with the lawyers. And then we talked to Alberta Medical Association President Dr. Paul Parks on August 29th, the day after we talked to the lawyers to respond to some of those claims. How impressive is Dr. Parks, by the way?
Great guy.
Like I told him yesterday, I said, and please do listen to the interview, I said, I just appreciate when somebody in a position of leadership, like the president of the AMA, is driven by empathy and evidence. And I think that that's just a really wonderful combination. So you can check that out. But Real Talkers, you have responded en masse to our interview with Jeff Rath and Eva Chipiuk. That's August 28th, if you want to check it out to learn more about that class action. I mean, the question we're endeavoring to ask is, the word acceptable is careful to use here, because you got to tread gently when you're talking about somebody that has sustained a serious injury, like the paralysis or a heart condition or even death from a vaccine. And then you point out that is the outcome in 0.01% of all circumstances. The majority opinion is probably that, well, that's kind of what happens. There's always going to be a risk. But then you also hear from the families like we did in our email inbox, and they say, yeah, but these are real people and their stories deserve to be heard. And so we're talking about this and we're managing this, and well, we want to get to your feedback on that interview, and it comes in the form of a weekly tradition. As a matter of fact, the final episode of every week, courtesy of our friends at the DQs of Northwest Edmonton, we invite you to send us an email to give us your hot take. That's exactly what we're looking for. We want to hear it. It's the Flamethrower, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. And Ron writes in and he says, Jespo, I respect the whole idea of having a wide range of perspectives on the show, but oof, he says, I truly believe that the guests on August 28th were some of the worst I've ever heard on Real Talk. They were defensive for no reason. They had no reason to behave like they did. They felt like bad faith actors looking to pick a fight. In the simplest terms, says Ron, they needed to chill. And I'm not quite sure that I'm better informed after hearing such a combative and confrontational interview on their part. I respect your dedication to maintaining professionalism because I know that I wouldn't have. That from Ron. What about this one from Nat, who says, upon reflection, I am positive that lawyer, Jeff Rath, the arrogant, aggressive nitwit linked to the Hillbilly Alberta Prosperity Project on your show, is wearing a tinfoil hat as he spewed baseless vitriol across the airwaves. Can anyone give me an example of a single Canadian who ever received the vaccine against their will? I mean, since this is Alberta, am I safe to assume that somebody, saw ratchet straps being used to hold the unwilling participant down? Come on. My favorite part was the pompous statement, not even the humility of an insinuation that the entire Canadian medical system was involved in a systemic charade. Has he ever met a doctor? These people are well-educated business owners who are not interested in your dark web deep dives. And it's unfortunate that he wasted all that money on a law degree only to make a name for himself backing people who have less than a 6th grade student's understanding of how science works. What a load of absolute fucking nonsense. But also, Ryan, thanks for a great show, and thanks for pushing back on that overbearing bastard banging move to share acetaminophen stats. Okay, that from Nat. Megan says, wow, yeah, okay, passion, but maybe passion for the wrong thing? Maybe that's why that guy chose his profession as a lawyer. Yeah, vaccines do good for everybody, but there's always risk in everything that anybody does. That from Megan. What about this from MJ, who says, Jespo, I'm a regular listener. I'm always open to a good fact-based discussion, so I had to give your vaccine lawsuit episode a listen. Listen, 0.01% of the population who have been injured by the vaccine do deserve to be heard and possibly receive some kind of financial compensation, but that doesn't mean that vaccine injury is as widespread, as these lawyers would have you believe. I made it 10 minutes into that show before I wanted to pull the fucking hair out of my head. That esteemed ambulance chaser brought up issues with myocarditis in the vaccine, but failed to mention that a COVID infection results in significantly higher rates of myocarditis. Jespo here, that's what Paul Parks talked about on October 29th. Back to MJ, says he also failed to mention that the number of people with long COVID far outstrips the number of people who have been injured by the vaccine. A simple internet search will provide you with in-depth studies and articles from legitimate sources on vaccine safety. Now, I would have loved to hear a doctor with significant knowledge at the same time as those lawyers. At the same time, sure, but no doctor would agree to go on with them, to be honest. Says, I don't expect you to be able to fact-check everything that comes out of people's mouths in real time, but anecdotes regarding vaccine injury don't mean shit if they're not backed up with evidence. That's what I said about being in front of the court, right? MJ says, again, the 0.01% of people who are injured by the vaccine do deserve to be heard, but no more than the 99.9% that had no issues. That from MJ. What about this one from Mike, who says, Jespo, I listened to your episode about the class action lawsuit and vaccines. That lawyer, absolutely infuriating. It was like he went to the Alex Jones School of Communication, rattling off dozens of facts without allowing any time for interjection or follow-up on what he just spewed. I'm not saying that everything he said is wrong, but I feel like he's going with the move of spitting out as much as he can in one breath so that people can't keep up. I pity the judge that's inevitably going to have to reel him in countless times when this hits the courts. He says, dude, just admit you're afraid of needles and move on. The grievances about the pandemic and response will always be their crutch to lean on. This was once in a century occurrence, hopefully. Now, do I think government got everything right? No. Do I think it could have been handled better? Yes. But to sit there and say that this was some sort of grand conspiracy put together by multiple governments, big pharma, doctors, and nurses is idiotic. But Jespo, I'll give you full marks for giving that oxygen thief an avenue to express his point of view despite how much damage it did to my own blood pressure. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Mike. And this one from Greg, who's talking about the move. The Premier says she'll make pulling hospitals away from Alberta Health, handing them over to Covenant Health, the Catholic operator. Greg says, we're regular listeners of Real Talk. We find it informative and balanced. I'm writing in response to the Premier's plan to change rural hospital administration because they're, underachieving? I find it concerning, especially if a religious-based provider is used. Covenant Health brings religious bias into healthcare delivery. They don't allow medical assistance in dying. They don't allow emergency birth control. They certainly don't perform abortions. Religion should have no place in healthcare. Religious beliefs are personal choice. I object to having somebody impose their belief on me, especially if it determines the type of healthcare I can obtain. What makes the Premier think that Covenant Health can do any better? Just look at what religion did in residential schools. The Premier's not being truthful with us. The fact that Covenant Health had to temporarily close ERs in Bonnyville and kill them due to staffing issues, is she ill-informed or is she ignoring facts to push her own agenda? How is changing administration going to help rural patients if they no longer have access to certain procedures or services? Paul Parks talked about this. Check out the episode. Now, apparently these rights and choices, says Greg, don't align with elements of society that are seen as directly influencing the Premier. When she talks about injecting fear into the healthcare system, I think she's afraid if she doesn't do as she's advised, she'll be turfed as party leader. Greg, you might be right. So who's really in control? Is it good governance strategy? Fear? I don't think so. And I don't think Danielle Smith is governing for all Albertans. That from Greg, who in true Canadian fashion signs off, best regards. These are all real emails to talk@ryanjespersen.com. We welcome your feedback. And as always, the Flamethrower presented by our friends at the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Real Talk will be observing the stat on Monday. We will see you back here live on Tuesday. In the meantime, stay safe, friends, and one love.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer John Hicks. General Manager Katie Cook-Chivers. Account Coordinator Lawrence Derlego. Human Resources Lena Shepard. Website Design Mike Johnston. Voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.